Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's time for another batch of Deep Space updates. When I last left you, I was heading off to see the last Delta IV Heavy. And so, of course, that leads off the launches, which is how we always start this. So, yeah, that was at Vandenberg on the September 24th. It was actually delayed about half an hour. We were sitting with great anticipation, monitoring the communications. There was some concern that it may not fly in time, but it did eventually take off, and I got a few photos. They weren't great photos, to be honest, and actually many people were pointing their cameras the wrong way due to communications problems. Anyway, doesn't matter. That was the last of the Delta IV Heavies. The last Delta IV Heavy that will launch from the West Coast. There's two more that are going to launch from the East Coast in future years, but that was the biggest launch vehicle that's ever launched from the West Coast. So it's kind of sad to see that ending. And in just over or less than a month, I think we're going to see the last Atlas V on the West Coast as well. It's like, boy, things are really disappearing out there. Anyway, this was but a start of a very active moment, or a flurry of rocket launches, I think is the best way to say that. Because with 30 minutes after Delta IV NROL 91 lifted off, X-Pace, yes, X-Pace in China launched a Kuaizhou 1A, or Kuaizhou, is how you say that, 1A, with Xi'an 15 and 16 satellites going into sun-synchronous orbit. So yeah, that's also interesting because the Kuaizhou is really starting to accelerate its launch cadence. They've launched 3 times since August and September, and they've done that from 3 different launch sites, from Xichang, Jiquan, and Taiyuan. Anyway, 35 minutes after that, we had a Falcon 9 launching Starlink Group 4-35, 52 satellites from, of course, the East Coast. And, okay, it's a Starlink launch. Very cool and all that, unless you're an astronomer. And, yeah, speaking of astronomy, as I said, I went down to NROL 91 as part of like an anniversary weekend. And, of course, after watching this awesome vehicle lift off and having some dinner, we retired to the hot tub with a bottle of champagne, staring at the stars, and we totally saw a fresh batch of Starlink coming across, glittering in the sky, and it was mind-blowing. I mean, I'd seen it several times, my wife hadn't, and so it was very kind of cool to capture that moment. Anyway, couple of days later, we had on September 26th, we had a Long March 2D launching 3 more Yaogan military satellites. Based on the orbits, they're probably electronic intelligence satellites, but we can't be sure. Less than 12 hours after that, there was a Long March 6 launching another trio of satellites called Xi'an, and that basically means experiment, by the way. Long March 6 is based on the boosters for the Long March 5, incidentally, and we should be seeing another Long March 5 going very soon, because we will be seeing the next part of the Chinese space station launching on a Long March 5. October 1st, Firefly Alpha make their first successful launch into the black. That was their title of their mission. This was from Vandenberg. It was a low Earth orbit, slightly retrograde with a very small payload mass, and we all thought it was very cool to see it going. Turns out that based on orbital data, it may not have been quite as successful as they originally announced. So it looks like the vehicle ended up going into a 200-kilometer orbit rather than like a 300-kilometer orbit. There was clearly some issue, and the satellites have mostly deorbited, mostly before they were able to do anything useful. So there's some question as to what could cause this kind of failure. Obviously, they've never really tested their upper stage engine under full vacuum conditions, so that would be naturally a suspect. But I think, given that they got into a 200-kilometer orbit, I think it must be a guidance problem, because if the upper stage engine was underperforming, good guidance would adjust the trajectory so it was able to actually reach the target, right? And then it might run out of propellant, but at least it wouldn't end up in a lower orbit. So I think they've got some sensors, avionics, electronics, guidance, something like that, which just meant that they ended up trimming into a slightly lower orbit and then not compensating for that. So it still remains to be seen as to whether they will get a bigger, proper customer for the next launch, or they would need another demonstration of some sort. Anyway, 4th of October, we had an Atlas 531 5-meter payload fairing, 3 solid rocket motors, and of course a single engine on the Centaur. That will apparently be the last Atlas V to fly with 3 solid rocket motors. So this launched a pair of geostationary communication satellites, SES-20 and 21. And yeah, that launched from the Cape, and yeah, it's again, the Atlas V is starting to hit its sunset as we're starting to see the last flights of specific configurations. There's quite a few configurations of the Atlas, to be clear. 5th of October, Crew 5 finally launching to the space station on the Dragon Endurance with Nicole Mann as the commander, Josh Casada, Koichi Wakata, and Anna Kikina from Russia. Yes, this was in the middle of these international war. We still have Russian astronauts on American spacecraft. This was the first time a Russian has flown on a US spacecraft since STS-113. I'm looking at my notes. Nikolai Budarin. So that is decades ago or over a decade ago when that last happened. So yeah, they've reached the space station, they've docked onto the other port, they're going to be there for a week or so with both spacecraft docked there. Watching them come together, boy, Anna's hair is everywhere. That's kind of wild to see. So a few hours later, on the same day, from Vandenberg, there was also a Falcon 9 carrying a bunch of Starlink. And the image to see from this launch is Jack Beyer's amazing solar transit. He got it almost right down the middle, got the timing perfect. This is a beautiful image. Good job. So notably, this launch was carrying Starlink satellites into their standard 50-odd degree orbit rather than a polar orbit. I think they're still needing capacity. They don't have enough launch pads on the East Coast to keep up, so they're using the Vandenberg launch site to get more bandwidth, let's say, for their Starlink launches. Anyway, on the 7th, we had a Long March 11H. So the H says that it is a launch from the sea. The Long March 11 is basically a 4-stage solid rocket motor, like so many of these so-called commercial private companies in China that are mixing and matching building rockets using ballistic missile technology. So yeah, it launched a couple of Xi'an or whatever, or Sentispace, their navigation satellites, and they launched it from a barge off the coast. They've also demonstrated launching the Long March 11 from a missile carrier or a train. It can be encapsulated. Okay, on the 7th as well, that's just literally hours ago, Rocket Lab launched an Electron in a mission called It Goes Up From Here, right? A reference to the Argos payload, right? Argos 4 is a payload which is basically going to talk to transmitters on the ground and receive their scientific data. They say it'll be used for tracking wildlife. I know it can track maritime information from buoys that will float around on the ocean and transmit this data. It's a hosted payload sitting on a satellite built by General Atomics called the Gazelle, and they are going to host a number of different payloads over time. Apparently also includes some sort of radiation monitoring hardware on board. But on Thursday, we were also supposed to have a launch from SpaceX carrying the Galaxy 33 and 34. If you remember, Galaxy 15 failed about a month ago, and Galaxy, so Galaxy 33 would be a replacement for that. Unfortunately, the mission was a scrub. Very close to the countdown, there was some problem with the helium leak, which just goes to show you that ground service equipment leaking gases is not a thing that is just exclusive to NASA. So coming back, what else happened in the last, indeterminate time period? Same weekend as the Delta IV launched, we had DART. Yes, Monday afternoon, everybody watching the screens, watching the real-time feed from the Draco camera right up until impact. We got a lot of spectacular images from it. We have been downloading the images from Lichia Cube, and if a number of telescopes have looked at the asteroid since then, and it has developed a tail. Now, it's not clear to me whether this is a tail from just things flowing on different orbits, or if it's a tail that's being stretched out by the sun and solar radiation pressure pushing material away. I think solar radiation pressure is probably relevant to this. Hoping that we will actually figure out what kind of period change we're going to see. Figuring out how the period changes is going to rely on getting optical light curves, right? And the problem, of course, is that when you've hit it, you've created this big flare of light because there's all this dust in the vicinity. So to pick out the periodic changes as the asteroids orbit each other, that is going to have to be a little harder because of all that extra, variation in the brightness. The Capstone mission, which was launched with some time back, has finally been recovered. They announced this morning that they have commanded the spacecraft into a stable attitude once again, and the mission is going to continue. If you remember, it had hit some problem which had caused it to spin up, and they were spending a lot of time figuring out how to slow that down and get it back under control. One spacecraft which won't come back under control is India's Mars Orbiter mission, or Mangalyaan, right? That was launched back in November of 2013, and it lasted 8 years in Martian orbit. So yeah, basically it went into eclipse behind Mars, and when it came out the other side, the signal was not recovered. It's probable that the spacecraft tried to correct its attitude and ran out of propellant. It had been running low for a very long time. So this space probe originally set out to show or map methane in the Martian atmosphere. But it turns out that the instrument they launched just wasn't really up to the task, and they were never quite able to do that. But they did take quite a few really nice images of Mars, like real natural color images. Many of the pictures we see of Mars, for example, from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, don't actually have proper color information. This Mangalyaan was able to do this, and it got some nice stuff. Anyway, what else have we got going on? So, Chinese space station. As I mentioned, they're getting ready to launch the Mengtian module. So the Wentian module, which launched a few months ago, it docked onto the front of the station. And in the last week, what they did was they unhooked it and they moved it around to the side port using sort of miniature robotic arms and redocked it. So there's now space on the active docking port for the new module to come in whenever it's ready. Artemis, by the way, yes, if you remember when we last left Artemis, they were saying they might launch on the 27th, but we all know that didn't happen. They very quickly realized that Hurricane Ian was going to be a much bigger thing than it was expected at the time, and so they rolled it back inside the vehicle assembly building. Apparently, soon after this, there was a bit of a fire in the vehicle assembly building, but it wasn't a big problem. But yeah, the hurricane, on the other hand, that was a big problem. It hit Florida hard. There's over 100 people dead. It is a big mess. It's tragic that's happened. Okay, anyway, coming back to space stuff. So last episode, we talked about Soyuz MS-22 going up. That meant that Soyuz MS-21 is came back down, carrying Oleg Artemyev, Denis Matveev, and Sergei Korsakov. Before they left, they transferred command of the space station to Samantha Cristoforetti. So she was originally going to take command, but because of scheduling, she's really not going to hold the command position for that very long, although she is the first Italian to hold command of the space station, therefore ensure everyone gets good coffee, and first European woman to hold command position. So she'll be there until the 12th when she's scheduled to return home, and I think then she'll pass command over to Sergei Prokopfiev. So yeah, Well, NASA had the first or the final flight of the Sofia telescope. That is, if you remember, a telescope which was built into a 747, and it was like a 2+ meter telescope that was designed to operate, above most of the atmosphere, and therefore let it see, ranges in the infrared which would normally be obscured by water. And over its career, they were able to find some stuff that, they were the first ones to find. They were able to find water on the sunlit areas of the moon, which hadn't been seen previously. They found the earliest molecules to form. They found the signatures of helium hydride, because though we think of helium as an inert molecule, in the early universe you've still got a lot of helium and a lot of hydrogen, and turns out that's the first molecule that you can form for some complicated. Chemistry tells us, but apparently, yeah, the first molecules that formed in the early universe were helium hydride, and Sophia was the instrument that was able to detect that signature first. So yeah, Sophia unfortunately just cost too much to run for the amount of science it was getting back. At least that was the opinion. I thought that Sophia had some very unique capabilities. The fact that they had this big telescope, they could get above most of the atmosphere, and then they could get it back and change out the instruments. Changing out instruments on a telescope is important if you want to really do some research, because there's going to be new ideas, new technologies, and unless you want to launch an entirely new telescope, Sophia was a fantastic way of doing that. So speaking of servicing telescopes, of course, Jared Isaacman and SpaceX have volunteered to do a study to see whether there is something they can do to help maintain the Hubble Space Telescope. And I have a whole other video on that, but short story is, talking about boosting the Hubble Space Telescope to a higher orbit by locking onto it using a docking adapter in the trunk of the Dragon. And that is one possibility, but they would like to improve it. They would like to leave it better than when they arrived at it. We'll see where that goes. So for things maintaining things in orbit to things being forced to deorbit, in the last week or so, the US Federal Communications Commission unanimously voted to require 5-year deorbit or disposal times for all satellites that they are going to license. That used to be 25 years. Now, if you're launching a constellation of communication satellites, you have to have a way of disposing of it within 5 years. That really should cut down on the amount of garbage left in orbit, right? Because now the disposal is going to be sort of baked into the licensing more stringently than before. And yeah, speaking about deorbiting satellites, of course, Elon shared a really neat clip from Starlink. So the Starlink satellites, we know they're communications, but apparently they have engineering cameras on board, and one of them just happened to be pointed in the right direction to capture the Falcon 9 upper stage performing its deorbit burn. So you can see it up in the top right of the image. It leaves a sort of trail of pixels as it decelerates, so it will fall back to Earth. They also posted this very cool image from a fairing showing the trail launch of Falcon 9 launch, that happened just after dawn or just before dusk. One or the other. Was a very cool looking trail anyway. SpaceX are also announcing that they're upgrading Slick 40 so that they can launch cargo or Crew Dragon from it. So they currently do this off of Slick 39A, but since they're building the Starship tower next to it, NASA apparently expressed some concern about maintaining crew launch capability if, say, a giant Starship booster went the wrong way and damaged it. So they're going to be kitting out Slick 40 so that they're going to be able to move over to that in a contingency. And also, speaking of Starship, well, Booster 7 that had been rolled back to the high bay for servicing now rolled out this morning to the launch site with some new upgrades to make it more robust. The only thing that we can see easily is that they've now covered up the structure on the engines with like protective boxes or whatever, which presumably will, make them more proof against heat and or, RUD, shrapnel, that kind of thing. In the meantime, Booster 8, which had been rolled out, it didn't get any testing at all. They did actually test the launch sedan. One of the cool things that we saw was they used a crane to go in and pull against the hold down clamps to see that they could hold the kind of tension. And given that they were testing hold down clamps, that strongly suggests that they're ready to fire all of the engines at once. And they will really need the hold down clamps for that. So yeah, I think that is all the stories that I have here. I did see one story about a guy, amateur rocketry, Kip Duggery, I don't know his name, right? But this dude launched an amateur rocket to 89 kilometers, right? With a two-stage rocket. I'm sure he's going to have some very cool pictures, but apparently that's a record for a single-person team. And I am totally there for that kind of thing. It's awesome to see that kind of thing happening. Thanks for watching. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.